But I think fundamentally the readers have got to engage with the character, because it's the plot is what's happening. The characters are why it matters.
Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and I'm here today with author Tim Hardie. Tim, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks, Steve. How are you?
I'm pretty good. It's evening for you and morning for me, so we were just talking about that. And right before we went on, we were talking about it's weird to talk about books and entertainment when so many heavy things are going on, but
Yeah.
And about how I think people need a break from time to time, whether it's world events or just trouble in your own life or your own mental health. Sometimes just to get a breather. So, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So, what can you tell us about Brotherhood of the Eagle?
Okay, so Brotherhood of the Eagle, I'd probably describe it as dark fantasy. Right, I think a lot of this stuff gets lumped together in grimdark a lot these days, but I think it's probably more dark fantasy in terms of overall tone. So it starts with the first book, Hall of Bones, which is my debut novel that came out in November 2020. That is the one. Yes, perfect product placement there. So that came out in November 2020. And I describe the series as it's a bit, I suppose, Game of Thrones is quite a big influence in terms of my reading, and it seeped into the book. There's no two ways about it. So I think in terms of style, it's a bit like Game of Thrones, but mashed together with the TV show The Vikings, if you're familiar with that.
Right.
So it kind of draws from a couple of influences in terms of giving it its overall theme. And then it's book series. So I've released the sequel to Hall of Bones, Sundered Souls, that came out in 2021. I should probably wave that in front of the camera as well, just for completeness. So that was released, I think, at the summertime. Can't quite remember when now. July or August, I think it was. So that's the sequel that's out now, and I'm hoping to release a third book in the series, which we called Lost Gods, at some point, probably the back end of 2022. So yeah, the series is well underway, basically.
Nice. Is it a trilogy, or do you have it planned out?
It's an uncontrolled trilogy that's become 4 books. So I kind of, I wouldn't say lost control of my material, although I have slightly lost control of my material. It's more a case of, I think, more ideas came to me. So I had an original plot structure, but now I need a 4th book to basically complete the arc to my satisfaction, really. So 4-book series. Ideally, like to get that 4th book released in 2023. I feel like I'm a 1 book a year kind of author, so I want to kind of keep to that schedule, really. But yeah, 2 out of 4 so far.
Yes. And you mentioned Game of Thrones and being a big influence on you as you were writing, because whenever I sit down to write, or whenever I sit down to do anything creative, I always end up copying something else that's influenced me, because that's kind of my inspiration. So in what ways was that ever a concern for you to kind of steer to not be too close? And sometimes I, like for the YouTube channel, I do things that other creators do without really thinking about it. But when I look at it, so I did this exact same thing this person did, just because I enjoyed what they did, and I don't really think about it. So was that ever a concern for you to not be too close to what's inspired you?
I'm not too bothered about that, because I think in many ways fantasy is a genre that sort of builds on what's gone before. So you're always going to get, I think, influences from what you've read, and I think it's more about actually giving it a fresh take. So although I've mentioned the Game of Thrones and the Vikings in terms of the Brotherhood of the Eagle series, actually I think the single biggest influence in terms of when I started that book is actually probably Robin Hobb's Assassin's Farseer series, if you're familiar with that. And I think, to be honest, looking back, I think I borrowed quite a lot of ideas from that, probably more than I intended to when I set out. But the kind of political feel, for example, that Hall of Bones begins with, certainly that's very much drawn from Robin Hobb and Farseer. And yeah, I suppose with fantasy, often we use a lot of tropes that people are familiar with, and lots of ideas and concepts come up and get reused. And it's about more, I think, melding those ideas to your voice, because I think a lot of readers actually go into fantasy because they want to be surprised, but they also want to read something that feels familiar. We talked again about escapism, and lots of people like reading stuff that kind of maybe wrong foots them, or they have no idea what's going to happen next. But if you look at most genre fiction of all types, you kind of know what you're going to get with each individual book, and I think that does apply to fantasy. And it's about kind of leaning on those conventions, but then also trying to do something a little bit different with it at the same time, so that they really get something new out of the experience, whilst also sort of getting that escapism and that kind of fantasy hit they're looking for, really.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I love the covers for the book. The cover, both of the covers are just gorgeous. I mean, they're very eye-catching. They just look cool. How did the
Thank you.
covers come to be?
Well, I've got no artistic ability whatsoever, so that they didn't come to be by me creating any of them. And I must admit, I was kind of looking at sort of, I start again with self-publishing. You've got to kind of work out everything, and I don't fully appreciate quite how much of everything you've got to do. It really is literally everything. So I knew I needed to find a cover artist, and I approached a few artists for books I really admired, and I realised I just couldn't afford them. That was quite a stark realisation. So obviously, with any kind of project like this, there's going to be upfront costs. You know, the biggest ones are going to be really, I suppose, it's editing. If you pay for an editor, and it's cover art, isn't it? Those are the biggies. So yeah, I ended up actually going on to Fiverr and trying to find somebody from a freelance point of view who could kind of do it at a cost I felt I could afford and justify as a newbie author. And so ended up getting in touch and talking to quite a few different artists who were really keen to do it. But the one that I sort of just clicked with the best was a young woman called Anne Zedwick, who's also based in the States, actually. And yeah, we just sort of said, let's give it a try, see if you like the initial designs. And she came up with a color scheme, first of all, which I loved, and the artwork, which I hated. And then there was a great bit of to and fro where that was I really enjoyed that, actually. It was kind of, it's very creative writing, but it was just a different form of creativity, trying to come up with a cover that kind of captured essence of what the book is about. But also it also works as a book cover in its own right. So yeah, sort of me and Anne kind of hit it off, and yeah, she's obviously produced both covers so far, and she'll be working on Lost Gods later this year, basically.
Yeah, it's really, really great covers. So it's great that it sounds like you lucked out on Fiverr to find an artist that you clicked so well with. That's good. It's tough because you don't know where to start. There's so many of them.
Yeah, and I think that's it. You know, that there's so many things where you're learning all the time with this sort of stuff, independent. You know, I'm really glad I went onto social media when I did. I was late starting that side of things, but I learned an awful lot about the things I needed to think of. But yeah, I think cover art was probably my biggest concern going into it. Trying to find. I mean, I actually sort of worked on the basis of a price I could afford to walk away if that felt the right decision. But actually, in the end, we just gelled, and so I think that's probably quite a good tip, actually. Sort of, you know, commit. But if it doesn't work and it's not right, it's important to be able to not have sunk so much money into it you don't feel like you could walk away. But yeah, you know, honestly, she put that cover together in about a week. It was quite. I was quite shocked, actually, quite how fast she turned it around. But yeah, I think they look different, and that's really what I was looking for. I kind of knew vaguely what kind of feel I wanted. That I want, you know, strong colours. I wanted, you know, to be able to read the title, but you know, basic things like that make sure the reader catches the eye, but the sort of, you know, the name of the author and the name of the title of the book sinks in. But yeah, it's sort of like it kind of they just sort of slightly sets them apart. So I'm really pleased with that side, because it, like I say, it was a little bit of a leap into the unknown, really.
Yeah, it's scary to find an artist to find one that you clicked with. That's really great. So for your self-publishing journey, what was the biggest surprise? What surprised you the most from that journey?
Lots of things, really. It surprised me. I think it surprised me to find out what you can learn to do if you put your mind to it. That's been quite eye-opening, because I'm a bit of a technophobe, if I'm perfectly honest. So I wasn't looking forward to things like websites. I hated the experience of setting up my book on Amazon. That really almost broke me. So that there were bits that were quite hard, and I felt a lot of satisfaction at learning those skills. And actually, you know, you're holding the book, so clearly it worked in the end, but it didn't feel very easy. I think the other thing that probably surprised me the most is there is that online community, and that's very, very supportive. And I suppose when I set out, I kind of wondered, would I feel a bit like the outsider trying to get into the club? Whereas actually, it's got an open door policy, hasn't it? In reality, and you know, people are incredibly supportive about you as a new writer, and I think there's a bit of a psychological toing and froing with this exercise that is not always good for you. I think it's fair to say, you know, this is not, you know, anyone in publishing, whether they're a traditionally published author or independent, definitely has highs and lows with this kind of business. And I think for me, it's kind of opened up the door to getting a support network of people who really understand what you're going through, the struggles you've got. I've got an incredibly supportive family and friends who 100% behind me, and that's great. But they don't always necessarily quite understand what the challenges of some of this stuff are. It's very difficult to get that across, whereas the writing community really gets it. So I think, there were some challenges with it, but there was also, it's been much more rewarding doing this than I ever expected it to be. I felt, for me, publishing that book at the beginning was all about the self-satisfaction of, I'm getting a book that's available that anyone in the world can read, and it can get in the hands of readers. That was the objective, but it became a much more rewarding experience than that. And I think, that was a real eye opener. One of the best things I've done. Put it that way.
Wow, that's great. And how long has the idea for the book been in your brain? Has it kind of been brewing for you? Has it been around for a while and just kind of sitting there in the back?
Quite a while. 2011 was when the initial concept for Hall of Bones came into my mind. So that was before I'd read, for example, Game of Thrones. This is why the Farseer series is probably more important. So I was kind of writing that book as I was picking up George R.R. Martin's works later on, and that was my reading. And I think the two things then began to combine in my mind. But it's these characters have been with me for quite a long time. And the world building actually goes back to my previous attempt at writing a novel, which actually began in 2000. Probably the first knockings of that were 2003. Oh, wow. And then I kind of structured the initial, I suppose, the mythology of the world and how that kind of comes together. That was kind of structured and worked through almost basically its background material, really, as I wrote my first novel, which I started in 2005. But that basically wasn't a very good novel, which was a big bit of a problem. So it didn't get accepted by agents and things like that, because I was looking very serious at trad back then. But although that plot and structure didn't work, I quite liked the world I created. And so I kind of the scaffolding of Hall of Bones as a world was created in those early writings of the 2005 to 2011. But then Hall of Bones, in terms of the first proper draft of that, was written over a sort of 4-year period, 2011 to 2015. So again, it's taken a long time to actually get it to sort of independent publishing. Basically, it's taken a good few years, and I have revised it. So the 2015 version basically got not massively changed, but just tightened up before it came out in 2020. So I've been kind of working on and off with it for about 10 years, basically.
Wow. So what finally made you decide to pursue it, to get serious and say, I'm going to do what I can to make this happen? Was there a moment, or was there something that happened that made you kind of push you over the edge?
Push over the edge is probably quite a good description, actually. I started out trad in terms of that was the business model I was going with. So I've got an agent. I'm represented by John Gerald, who you may or may not have heard of. So a UK literary agent, been in the business for a very long time, actually, now, sort of 35 plus years. So basically I wrote that book and John took it on at the end of 2015. So Hall of Bones is the book that got me agented. And so obviously any kind of trad route, trying to explore that particular option, it's not a quick process. So basically it was out to sub. I then just started working on the sequels and the follow-ups to the books, because that was the story I wanted to tell. But it kind of got to a point that a few years down the road where John and I were having a chat and sort of saying, is it going to happen? If it was going to happen, would it not have already happened by now? That there does come a point where a book gets past its sell-by date in terms of being hawked around traditional publishers. So for me, I think the fact I was agented, I knew that book was of publishable quality. I wasn't just publishing something purely out of vanity, and I just fundamentally wanted readers to read it. So John and I had a good chat, and actually John was he's always been incredibly supportive. Very important part of actually making me a better writer. And so we sort of said, okay, we'll give it a final shot with trad, but there still wasn't any interest. So I said to John, if that happens, it doesn't happen rather, I'm going to go independent and get it released by then. And so we kind of did that with full agreement, really. Fundamentally, it's about, if you write a book, you don't write it just for no one to read it. So I didn't really feel like I had any option but to go independent in the end with that. I'm still very interested in the trad route. I think there are definitely pros and cons to the the two different models you've got. And I've actually got a separate book that's out to traditional publisher submission now, which is a different set of characters. So same world, different continent, different set of characters. So John's basically approaching publishers with that right now, and I'd still be very open to the idea of being traditionally published. But if the answer from the traditional houses is no, then my answer is going to be that book will be independent, because I don't see any reason not to have that book in the hands of readers. And obviously that ended up leading to getting into SPFBO finals. So I think that can, for me, justify the decision I took, really. So it's been quite a long route, but I think in some ways that was quite a good thing, because from 2015 onwards, when I was working with John, I was still writing, and basically my craft improved. So I do think, in all honesty, the book that we were sort of looking at sending to publishing houses in 2015, 2016, it's not as good as the book you've got in your hands now, because that book has been honed and improved further with another 5 years of writing practice and craft, really.
And you actually beat me to the punch, because I was about to ask you about SPFBO and being a finalist. What was that like to be a finalist in such a prestigious competition?
It's just a bit bonkers, really. I mean, again, it's been a great experience, and it has been a bit of a confidence booster. I won't lie. It was quite tense, just waiting for the outcome. I mean, in some ways, it's awful if you kind of get cut first, because you're sort of out within the first week of the competition starting, and that doesn't feel great. But for me, it was kind of like semi-final announcement was only about 3 or 4 days before they then went in, and my particular blog announced who the finalist was. So I kind of was, until it happened, I was pretty much expecting to get cut. I thought might get to a semi-final sticker spot. That seemed doable by the time it got to late October, and I was still waiting to hear. But yeah, so it was a bit of a roller coaster. It's quite a public, well, it is a public contest. That's kind of the whole point, isn't it? They want people to see your work, but it did feel a bit, I suppose in the North you feel slightly exposed as well, because obviously it's not just, you're either in or out, which is pretty, binary, but then obviously getting into the finals, it's quite public in terms of, I've had some good reviews and I've had some less good reviews on that. And then, of course, they're splurged for all to see. So there's kind of an element of, why have I done this to myself? What was I thinking? But that's kind of tempered with, it's also led to some other great opportunities. I've been on panels, I've got to know the other contestants really well in the finals. That's been great fun. Lots of interview opportunities, things like that. So it's definitely moved Hall of Bones up a level. So I can see most definitely, in terms of, it was out for about a year before that finalist announcement was made, and it wasn't really registering. It was just running. It was literally under the radar. People, the odd person was picking it up, but it just moved up a level as soon as SPFBO came out, and that's probably been, one of the benefits of it. Again, it's getting to, it's independently published, to get it into the hands of readers. So SPFBO's been brilliant at actually just making more people aware that I even exist. I think that's been the biggest single benefit, actually, that people have, a small group of people have started to hear that I'm a serious writer now. But yeah, it's a proper roller coaster. It's not. This is what I'm saying. With any kind of, with writing in particular, as an author, you do go through these enormous roller coasters of highs and lows. And it was, oh my god, I'm going to get cut. Oh, I might do okay. I'm in the finals, hooray! And then your review kind of experience is similarly bumpy, really. So it's quite an odd experience in some respects.
Yeah, it must be really nerve-wracking to have to wait, and then because you send the book in and then you have to wait, and it's a lot of waiting. It must be.
Yeah, and all the reviews now, of course, are stacking up big time. So we've had a few. Poor Lauren McRae hasn't had a single review since she got into the finals. So she's got off. She's literally on that single score right now. And others have obviously kind of garnered 4 or 5 at this point. So it's going to be really the next. Kind of stealing myself, March and April are going to be pretty intense, and we're going to suddenly get this absolute avalanche of stuff coming at us. Yeah. So, we'll see what that leads to.
Yeah. Wow. And so when do you find time to write? Because I know that you're involved in, you have a day job, of course. So how do you balance your life and your writing time?
It's probably changed. I think the biggest single constraint is children, actually. So obviously when I'm talking about writing, 2003, 2005, my children were really small. So at that point in my life, my writing window was the evening. And then sort of slowly that that needle has changed. The kids have got older, you know, often they're out at night, and I'm basically dad's taxi driving all over the place. So it switched around. So nowadays I'm primarily, I tend to write primarily in the mornings. So I do some evening work on the book probably on a Monday or Tuesday night. It's quite good. And then as the working week gets on and I get a bit more tired, I flip over to doing things like your social media and stuff that just requires a bit less brain power. And then I have a big push at the weekend when the teenagers are basically in bed and they can't get in the way. So it has completely flipped round from being a night owl to being an early morning writer. And that's so far has worked quite well, trying to do that sort of, especially for Saturday morning, get up early. I try and always get at least a chapter work through or something done, or a short story done or something like that. That's kind of the objective, is to make the most of those early morning starts, really.
And after being a finalist in SPFBO, how did that change your approach? Did you feel extra pressure for the follow-ups after that, after getting
Yeah, I did actually. I think it's so at that point. So by the time I was sort of Sundered Soul's already been written, and that, you know, I think actually Sundered Souls is a better book than Hall of Bones, because I've had, you know, that Hall of Bones is my debut. You definitely become a better writer with each and every book you write. But I also think with the third book I mentioned before, it was a trilogy that's become 4 books. I lost control a little bit of my material as I moved into that third book, because I was chucking so many ideas at it. And I think I do know that if I just simply put out that there is a finished book, there is a finished third book, but put that out now, I don't think that is on a par with the previous 2. So for me, I'll definitely will not release a book that I don't think is as good as the book that got me into the finals of SPFBO, for example. Yeah, there is a bit. I suppose there is a bit of a pressure to sort of maintain your output, and I think also you learn again. You're learning more. So I look back at. So basically, I'm trying to think. That first version of Lost Gods, I probably finished about 2019. So this is the point where I just about got to the point where I was thinking, Trad's not going to happen for Hall of Bones. You're going to flip this. So actually what I did was I parked the whole project. I wrote this completely different novel just to give myself a bit of a mental break from it. And then I went back in and I've started to work my way back through the series and my back material, really. And yeah, when I got to Lost Gods, I just thought, this is definitely a weaker book than the others. It needs so much work. And so I've really been, for the past, 8 months or so, that's been the biggest battle, really, since Sundered Souls came out, trying to get Lost Gods into shape. And I suppose, yeah, trying to sort of, you know, yeah, there's a confidence boost with getting into the finals, but yeah, there's also a pressure that comes that kind of, you've got to, you know, yeah, you know what you're doing, but you've also got to make sure that you don't sort of drop the ball at any point, especially in a series. You don't want to lose readers before they get to the end. So, yeah, Lost Gods is probably the hardest book I've ever written, actually. It sounds a bit strange because you'd think by the third book in a series you really know what you were doing, but that for me, I think it's down to, yeah, I think with the benefit of hindsight, control your material better, work out your plot better, and stop going off down rabbit holes all the time. I've cut so many bits out of that book and shredded it since I've started this latest set of edits. It's coming at about 200,000 words. I think it needs to be around 150, which basically means I've written 50,000 words I didn't need to write, which looking back is not great for productivity, really, is it? So it's a bit of a battle, actually.
Yeah, and on Hall of Bones, I love the prologue. It's one of those, because you know, I hear a lot about catching the reader's attention right away. That prologue, I wanted to know what happened. It pulled me in. I think it's not even a page; it's like 3/4 of a page, but it caught me, and I wanted to know, how we got to that point.
Awesome. I'm glad it worked. Because, yeah, a lot of people have gone, I didn't even realize until I kind of got onto social media, there's even a debate about whether you should have a prologue or not. And some readers are like, well, let's skip them on principle. And I thought, well, that's a terrible idea. I don't like the idea of that at all. For me, that prologue is really important because I want to signal what this book is like. Because it is a bit sort of, you know, that first part is more about, I suppose, family, relationships. You want those. Hopefully, you want to root for the characters it concerns. But I want to also signal to the reader in that prologue, it's a dark story, and I didn't want to ambush people with that halfway through the book if they hadn't actually just got a taste of maybe what's to come. And in a way, I think with the benefit, it kind of almost it alters the way you read those early chapters. I think because you kind of know there's like this weight above. You know that things are good, but you also know that they're going to a dark place, and it's waiting to see when that actually happens and why. I think is is part of why the structure that, for me, I think that the structure of that book works, partly because of that prologue and that sort of decision, really.
Yeah, it was great. I really loved it. And I also read that you were a big D&D player.
Oh yeah, I was. Yeah, I mean, I was. Yeah, I'm a child of the '70s, so I was kind of, born into an era where D&D was happening. It was a brand new thing when I was sort of growing up. So yeah, that kind of, looking back, I probably sort of, seriously damaged my educational prospects with the amount of D&D I played. But yeah, it was a big part of my life in the '80s, and yeah, into the '90s actually as well. Sort of, playing those sort of early versions of those games. I look at them now; they're really sophisticated. I mean, that the manual when I was a lad, when I started playing, it was only about that big, and you could sort of read it in an afternoon. It's like, exactly. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to go delve back into it now. It actually almost seems like it's too complicated. Back then, it was a pretty free and easy kind of easy to pick up game, and yeah, a lot of us spent an awful lot of our weekends basically not doing the things that our parents really thought we should be doing. If I'm being totally honest with you, but yeah, it was a fun time actually. Again, I think probably in reality that was probably the early parts of exploring storytelling. Creativity, imagination. I did do dungeon mastering and games, running games. But actually, wasn't my forte. I preferred to play the characters actually, and maybe that's why I'm a writer, because I like characters, and characters obviously are basically they're the cornerstone of writing a good book, in my opinion. So I think D&D was kind of like a good training ground for the imagination. But yeah, I think nowadays it's probably not for me anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I've looked into it, but it seems really complicated. So it's
Yeah.
kind of, I don't know. But yeah, I was wondering how much that experience kind of shaped your storytelling and characters. So that's yeah, because it is all imagination. It's all in your, it's role playing. So
Yeah, I can remember sort of trying to explain to people who didn't do it what I was doing. There is a good proportion of society at the time that they just look at you like you're deranged,
yeah,
and it's when you stop and we just sit down with pieces of paper, and we just pretend to be somebody totally different. And obviously there are all these magical races, and anything could happen at any time really. It's down to you, and if you roll the wrong dice, you die.
yeah.
You say what? But at the time, it did seem, and it was a tremendous release. I mean, I know it sounds a bit, again, we talked before about sort of like, real world events and how they kind of intrude upon how we want to relax. But in the 1980s was the era of the Cold War.
Yeah.
As kids, we grew up in a period where, in many ways, we were kind of expecting pretty terrible things to happen, and we that was talked about quite openly and freely and played out on the media. Or and yeah, again, people wanted an escape, a bit like reading's an escape. For me, I think D&D was an escape from school, which I didn't particularly enjoy, studies, which I wasn't particularly enthusiastic about, and the wider world events that frankly didn't want to think about. So again, it was a perfect release, and it was a huge part of my life. Like I say, really throughout the 1980s, really.
So in your mind, what makes a good story?
Well, as I think I said before, I think character definitely does, because I think a story can be beautifully plotted, and I think plot is important because it's the scaffolding that tells the story's about, and that I think is the weakness of a current book. That's the issue I've got to address. But I think fundamentally the readers have got to engage with the character, because it's the plot is what's happening. The characters are why it matters. You've got to get both of those elements right to actually kind of make something that I think a reader will engage with. If they don't engage with the characters, and I think that some people will hate Hall of Bones, let's put it out there, and they will hate Hall of Bones because they will bounce off that. It's a first person, primarily a first person perspective in terms of how the world is perceived. So that's a bit high stakes in some ways, because if you don't like that central character, you're really not going to like the book, and that might just close it down. But I think primarily if you can create characters people can relate to, struggles that they can sort of empathize with at the very least, that for me kind of, all the rest of it is kind of a bit irrelevant. Whether there's I don't know what type of magic system, for example, there is, doesn't bother me in the slightest. It could be high, incredibly detailed and sophisticated. It could be almost non-existent, like you see in some low fantasy books. But it's all about that central premise of what's going to happen to this individual, and do I care? And I think if you care, that's when a book works, and then the rest of it is really just gravy.
And you mentioned a little bit about world building, and I wondered, how do you build a world? What is your process to world building? Are there techniques that you use to help the reader understand the world that's in the book?
Yeah, I mean, there's more world than there is the reader experiences. I've got a terrible memory, as everyone in my family would tell you. So I have to write everything down. If I don't, that piece of world knowledge is lost forever. You know, some people can hold stuff in their heads, and it's for them it's quite easy, but that isn't the case for me at all. So, yeah, I find for me it's quite important to visualize the world first. So whilst a good story is plot and character, I think giving a reader a rich experience is making that world credible and believable. So, like I said, I kind of effectively wrote a practice novel just to get the world and the mythology kind of pulled together and developed, and then I've been tweaking that ever since. But then, yeah, there's loads of background notes. I mean, I once wrote a history for a planned novel about a set of characters on a different continent, and I've not used any of it so far. So there's about 40 pages of total nonsense, basically. It's world building on a grand scale for an unused continent. So yeah, I do build quite extensively, mostly by note taking. Visualizing the maps for me are quite important. Not so much for I don't need a precise map when I write the story. I want a precise map by the time I've finished. So again, I think the book version of the book you've got, I think, should have the map in the cover somewhere.
It does, yeah.
Awesome, good. So that's printed result. But yeah, so that's the one. Yeah, it's possibly not bringing out such, but yeah, there's plenty of detail there. Plenty of detail there. And again, that map plays a purpose because all of those towns have got at least a loose history to them. Certainly the clan lands have each of those individual clan lands. And for me, it kind of it just helps brings the world to life, and it's for the characters to have stakes, that their actions have got to have meaning, and part of what gives your actions meaning is going to be things like the world events. Obviously, All of Bones is about it's partly a political novel. It's about one clan trying to get power over another and over the surrounding region. And I think what slightly surprised me as I was writing was that I was struggling to keep up with the plot myself, because they were all sort of reacting in their own kind of individual ways. In terms of some clans were sort of trying to remain neutral. Some were falling under the sway and becoming joining with the Voron clan, which is the main antagonist people in the story. And again, I think all that richness kind of came out because I'd done the world building first, because I knew who headed up each clan, where their alliances were, and how they'd be tested when that sort of the key events in the novel start to roll. And that kind of gave the novel much more life than I expected it to, actually. So I think for me, world building is really important, but there's definitely more out there than gets on the page. I think that's the right way round, because for me, I only want to give the reader what's relevant. Every now and again, I might do a little bit of extra gloss just to kind of make it pop a bit. But fundamentally, I don't want to use stuff that's in there unless it has some sort of relevance to the plot, because I appreciate the reader's they've got to absorb quite a bit. So I know 150 characters in Hall of Bones, that wasn't a good idea looking back. I don't think any normal publisher would have let me get away with that necessarily without some trimming. But yeah, so I want the reader's got to absorb a fair amount of information, and so I wanted the world building to be relevant when they got it, to make it feel, like that they're experiencing a fantasy novel, but not, pages and pages of all this stuff that they just don't need. That's for me to keep track of behind the scenes, then use when it's relevant, really.
Yeah. And you had mentioned before about fantasy tropes that are reused, and there's some staple tropes in fantasy, but do you have any favorites that you enjoy, whether it's reading or writing about, like tropes that you like?
No, I'm not sure I've really got I'm not sure I really have said have a favorite. I suppose with Rothko, I'm kind of inverting the chosen one kind of trope a little bit. Sometimes it's quite fun to invert those tropes. I thought John Gwynne did that really well in the Faithful and the Fallen series, which are, again, brilliant set of books if you've had a chance to read. Yeah, I'll thoroughly recommend them if you haven't. where, you know, particularly sort of the antagonist thinks they are the chosen one and thinks they're the hero of the story, and they're actually not. And you know, it's actually quite obvious to the reader from quite, I'm not sure you're right. I think you might be the bad guys here. And it takes them about book 3 before they go, I am the bad guy, but I'm going to embrace it anyway. I think those are quite good, where you're sort of, you're, again, this is about going back to people want to experience a fantasy novel. They know what they want to get certain things out of it, but they also want something fresh and new. And I thought John Gwynne did that really well. That's a great example for me of the chosen one being subverted, really.
And who is your biggest supporter?
Who is my biggest supporter? I think, yeah, lots of people. You know, my wife, Liz, absolutely. You know, she lets me spend an inordinate amount of time writing books. So yeah, obviously I'd say my family would be absolutely up there. Yeah, I've made some good friends through, you know, fellow writers that have supported me on different parts of the journey. I mean, I'd say, you know, give John Jarrell a shout out. He's been great for helping. He's been supportive because he's given me freedom to do what I want to do, but he's also been very good at saying, you know, this bit of your writing is good, this bit you could work on. He's been very helpful at shaping my voice. So technically, a great supporter and a fount of knowledge and wisdom, which is what you need. And then I say lots of writers that are kind of probably at a similar sort of stage in their careers to me. We kind of, so I'd mentioned there, you know, I think there's Holly Tinsley has been incredibly supportive, fellow SPFBO finalist. I mentioned Crystal Matar in that as well. I mean, all the finalists have been really, really welcoming, but some of them I have known for longer and, you know, built up some sort of relationships and friendships that way. P.L. Stewart, who's written the Drowned Kingdom saga. I think have you interviewed him fairly recently? I'm trying to think, is that right?
Yeah, we have a series starting soon.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, he's the most positive person on Twitter, I think, and he kind of motivates me, which is good. You know, you need people that get it, but also maybe that you get different things from. Writers like Jacob Sannex, Sean Crow. I'm trying to think who. There's kind of like a bit of a gang. Bjorn Larson, who I think is one of the most versatile writers I've ever read. Actually, whatever he turns his hand to is always different, but it's always brilliant. You know, it's a small group like that that's kind of come together. That's just gives you enough of a critical mass to bounce ideas off, and you know, I think just support each other a little bit, really. So yeah, I think that I'd say that group has kind of come to the fore and been incredibly supportive. I'll give a shout out to Emily Penn as well, who's a fellow member of the John Jarrell Literary Agency. So she's again, she's sci-fi writer, but again, incredibly good at sort of drawing people together within the Twitter sphere in particular. And yeah, we've had we've done some fun stuff together, actually, a few interviews and other sort of musical side projects and all sorts of random stuff. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So I thought I was releasing a book in 2020, and I did do that, but I think I also stumbled into this sort of like bar of, you know, people that I thought might be a bit crazy and a bit, you know, cold shouldered, but actually really, really welcoming. That's been, you know, that group's kind of come to the fore the last couple of years to sort of cement that, really. Go with those guys. They're all great guys.
And you mentioned having teenagers. Have your kids read your books?
My youngest doesn't really like the fantasy genre and sort of like simply says, no, Dad, it's just, I'm not reading it. And that's absolutely fine. Nothing wrong with that. My oldest has had a read, and she's more into that kind of genre, really. So it's kind of a bit weird, isn't it? I suppose if your dad gives you his book to read, well, how do you react to that? I think we'll have to see whether they sort of maintain any kind of interest. But yeah, I got some good feedback from my oldest. Actually, she gave me a bit of useful critique on character development, which was actually spot on. So she probably deserves a bit of a writing credit for some of the elements of All the Bones, actually.
Was that nerve-wracking for you when she was reading the book? Were you kind of nervous about what her reaction would be, or
I think anybody where you know them, it's always more. The stakes are always high, because I mean, you know, you spent 10 years writing this. It's appalling. Can you imagine? You know, because they obviously families sort of do tell it to you, you know, a lot more as it is, don't they? Which is probably good. So yeah, I did feel a little bit nervous. Having said that, I mean, so obviously people I know in real life. So my wife has done some test reading for me. A good friend of mine, Lawrence, has also done the same. And actually, I know I will get an unvarnished view back. And that's really, really important. There's no point somebody reading your book critically and saying, this is great, because there's always room for improvement. And there's no, so you need that, obviously don't destroy the author by giving them, just shooting them down and telling them it's awful with that. But if something doesn't work I always have a bit of a rule that if something didn't work for somebody in my sort of immediate test group, then I would think about it and decide what to do, and then I'd just forge on regardless, or I'd change it. If more than one person mentioned something didn't work for them, that was, for me, was a bit of a red flag, that definitely needed looking at. But it only works if they're being completely honest with you about what they actually think. So so it's nerve-wracking for a number of ways. It's nerve-wracking because they know you and you want them to actually think what you're doing is worthwhile and not just lunacy. But it's also nerve-wracking because actually you get feedback that might mean you've got to really think hard about the book, about what you're doing. So this is why novels take such a long time to write, especially when you're starting out, because there is just so much to learn. There's the technical, there's so many technical act of actually writing something on the page that people want to read, but then finding the plot and the characters that want to carry through to the end. All those things are quite complex things, and getting that feedback's really helpful to get those just right.
And no matter what it is, it's just the nature of the business. With whenever you create something, somebody's not going to connect with it somehow. So what was that like to get negative feedback? What the negative feedback? What was that an adjustment, or what was that like?
What's it? How do I put this? Or somebody's reaction is always going to be right. So I think I recently put a bit of a blog together because I've been sort of like having a bit of an agony experience over, oh my God, how do you score books? Because I'm getting to know writers better. I'm getting into this stage now where actually some of the people I know better, we're starting to swap books, arcs, those kind of things. We're kind of getting into that space, and I'm quite happy to review, it helps you discover new writers, and I'm happy to review their work and so on as well. And then I thought, God, do I give this can I give this 5 stars, or what will I think if I give it 4? And you kind of get into this slightly odd situation of, I suppose, scoring and grading art in a really sort of precise way, when actually a novel's a really, really complex form of art. And the reason a novel's a really complex form of art is because 2 people are involved in its experience. There's the writer who writes the novel, and there's the reader who experiences it. And the thing that actually matters, it's the reader who experiences it. And this is why you get different scores, because one reader will take a book and will bounce off Rothgar, the main character, because he's an idiot. So, 2 stars. That's a perfectly legitimate response, because for that reader, that was their experience of reading the book. And you mustn't, it's very easy to say you can't take it personally. Obviously, I take it really personally. Because it's hard not to, but it's not, they're not saying that about Tim Hardie. They're saying that about what they found in the pages, and that was their creative experience. Somebody else will take it and say it's a 5-star novel, it's absolutely brilliant, and it's fantastic. And both of those responses are totally legitimate. So I'm not delighted when somebody says I didn't enjoy reading your book, or even worse, I don't like it when people just give it like 1 star with no reason. That's just like mean, isn't it? At least tell me give me the vitriol. Tell me why you think this book is terrible. I might even share that on social media, because I can, in some ways, bad reviews actually generate sales. It's not necessarily a bad thing, because often what doesn't work for a reader is exactly what another reader's looking for. So, if, you don't like, somebody said, I didn't like this, it was dark fantasy, and I didn't, 2 stars. Somebody else said, well, that's dark fantasy, I probably will quite enjoy that, I might go and have a look. If they simply score it without any kind of feedback, you haven't really got anything anything out of the experience for either of you, I think, in actual fact. I'm trying really hard not to take it personally. I am still quite new at this. I do sometimes take it really personally, but that's not an invitation to score me really badly just to see whether you can make me cry or anything like that. But I understand why. I understand that you can't. Not everyone's experience of a book is unique, and so you can't expect that that to reflect in all 5-star scores. That simply isn't the case. And I think if you're kind of pitching it within 3 and 4, you're doing something right. And I'd be quite happy with that, actually.
Yeah, I know if I were ever to publish anything or even self-publish, I would take it real personal. So
Yeah,
it must be really tough. And it's funny you mentioned about negative reviews because a lot of the times I'll look at a review and it'll be a 2-star, and just like you said, this is too dark, this is too violent, this is too,
mm,
it's so I'll buy it because I like those kind of stories. So even a negative review can be a positive thing for a book if there's
yeah.
some feedback behind it.
I mean, some of them are hilarious. I mean, I can't think. Trying to think of an example. I think it was Rob Hayes that I saw do it, where he created a banner of reviews for one of his books, and I can't remember which one it was now. But on the left hand side, it was all all positive. So it was like breakneck action and pace, for example. And then on the other side, there'd be somebody else review saying moved at a pedestrian pace. But I was bored to tears. And I thought, it's the same book. How can it have? How can that very measurable thing be different? But of course, it's different for individuals. So. Yeah, I think you kind of got to embrace it in a way. You've got to you've got to learn to laugh at it. At the end of the day, you're putting something out there for the public consumption. The public are going to have an opinion on it, and you've simply got to get to a place where you're comfortable with that. Otherwise, frankly, you're in the wrong business, really. And I know there are lots of authors that don't read their reviews for that reason. I'm still at the point where, yeah, I've got a review. It's quite new. That's still quite exciting for me. So I probably trawl it more regularly and more keenly than I should do. So then again, it's that roller coaster, isn't it? Really, once more, you kind of get that experience of the highs of the 5, the lows of the 1, or the indifference of the 2 of the 3, for example, whatever people might mean by that, really. But yeah, I think a lot of authors, in some ways, they think, you know what, I just need to find my audience. It doesn't really matter what you as an individual think. I'm going to find my audience, write what I want to write, and it'll appeal to that group, and that's absolutely fine. And the fact it doesn't appeal to everybody is also absolutely fine. To be honest, I probably need to get to that place. I probably need to stop sweating this stuff quite so much, but it's just still the novelty factor is still a bit too strong. I'm only sort of 18 months into this at the moment, so it's good advice I'm not following, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I bet it. I don't know if I could. It would be a lot for me too. So I can definitely see where you're coming from. And something that always intrigues me is how different authors, if they listen to music while they write. Do you listen to music when you write?
No, I don't. I mentioned Emily Inkpen before, and we pulled together some author playlists, which we put out sort of via Twitter. This is probably going back about about a year, or well, it's been going on for about a year. I think we put the last one out as a Christmas playlist to kind of wrap the whole thing up, basically. So yeah, I know a lot of writers find it really helpful to get in the mood, or to sort of like channel a particular tone they're trying to get. I just find that music swamps my sort of all I get is the music. I can't possibly write and have that kind of interference going on in my brain. But I get why other people want that kind of prop to help them write. So yeah, it was quite good fun actually picking tracks and things for it was Inkwalker Collective. If you search on Twitter, it brings up a few randos. So, yeah, you've got some of my musical tastes coming through in that with quite a few other authors actually. It was quite a big collaborative project in it. So when it first kicked off. So yeah, I think some people find it helpful. I personally, I don't mind a bit of background noise. In the world before COVID, writing cafes and things was sometimes for me was quite a good technique, because you just I don't find it works very well writing in my office now, where I'm sitting here now doing this recording is my office I use for work, which is fine. But I find it very difficult to write here. I actually prefer to write in the hub of the house and just be aware of what's going on, even if I'm concentrating on something. So for me, it's more definitely not music, but a bit of background noise seems, whatever reason, just to make the creative juices work a bit better.
Do you have a favorite album that you will never get tired of?
God, I suppose it depends a little bit on mood. Actually, I'm quite eclectic in my sort of musical tastes. So I've recently, for example, I've rediscovered the Pet Shop Boys, which again this is showing my age and sort of like 80s music and all the rest of it. For a long time, I hadn't listened to them. I've gone back through their sort of back catalogue and into the early 2000s. So they're kind of a band that sort of like, again, they've been completely, it doesn't really matter what the musical trends have been throughout all the sort of 30 or nearly 40 years they've been recording. It kind of keeps they keep putting out their output in the way they want. And again, I think that's a good sort of lesson for creatives, actually. Other music that I've really hard to think off the top of my head. What else I've been? I pretty much listen to anything. I'm probably only classical music is a bit of a blind alley for me. I've never really clicked with that, but anything in the rock pop kind of world is I enjoy. But I'm not really a big one for lists and sort of saying these are my top 10 albums of all time. You might ask me that in February and I'll have a view. It'll probably be completely different in March.
Yeah, I know what you mean. My list was always different whenever someone asks. It's always different. But we did have a question from the previously mentioned P.L. Stewart.
Oh yeah,
and he would like to know how you feel about being the favorite author of the incredible blogger Under the Radar, SFF books. So Blaze.
Yeah. How does it feel? It feels really bizarre. I think it's you need people to help you, I think, is the bottom line. You can't. I think, again, I thought I could release a book and people would pick it up by word of mouth, and it would just slowly get traction. And then I realized that actually the only way it gets word of mouth is by you telling people it exists, and so you need the help of the book blogging community. People like you, to actually just help raise that awareness and to make people aware that these things are actually out there. And I sort of released my book into the void and went, oh, wait a minute. What I probably should have done here is let people know and given out advanced reader copies and actually told people this was coming. So I then kind of reversed that strategy pretty rapidly of not doing that and instead started doing that. And Blaze was one of the very first people that picked up on the series. And again, it was at the time, it was just really important that somebody liked it. Was I wasting my time? Well, had it been a big mistake? And, somebody sort of saying, I really like this series. I really, really enjoy it. I think Blaze put it in his top books of last year, which absolutely blew me away when I think of all the different books that people have put out. For somebody to say, you know what, of all the books I read in the past 12 months, this was one in my top 10. I was made up by that, if I'm honest with you, because there's an awful lot of times when Amazon, obviously being independently published, you know exactly how many books you're selling and how many pages people are reading. And there were dark days when that number was nil. And I'm not joking. That number was literally nil sales, nil pages read on Kindle Unlimited, and all the rest of it. It's just that. Am I absolutely? Have my family been really polite? All those test readings they've done for me, to actually go and say, he can't write for toffee. He's terrible. So somebody like Blake's coming up and saying, you're all right. You've done a good book. I really, really enjoyed it. And then to actually put it in that top 10, it just keeps you going. And again, like I said, as I mentioned, it's like a roller coaster. It's more a roller for me. It's been more of a roller coaster, but every time you're going up higher each time, and then you drop back down, and then you go higher again. And that is those sort of moments. If somebody says that, it helps gather that momentum again for that next kind of push up. I can sort of remember Blaze messaging me sort of privately saying, "You are entering a SPFBO, aren't you?" I thought, I think I am, but I'm slightly nervous about doing it, and I might bottle it at the last moment. And those little words of encouragement are actually what make the difference sometimes between somebody being creative but not quite having the courage of their convictions, and actually them saying, actually, this is good, and you need to be telling people about this. So for me, it's a great question by PL, because Blaze is a great. He's shone a light on an awful lot of good books, and he likes his mainstream, doesn't he? But he also very supportive of indie as well, alongside. And I think these days he's swinging much more towards actually indie being his preferred form of reading, and having somebody that kind of growing platform supporting you, it just makes a massive, massive difference. So if anyone listening or watching this, get your marketing strategy right and talk to bloggers well before you start releasing books. It pays massive dividends, really.
Yeah, and from a self-publishing standpoint, it almost feels like writing the book is just the beginning, because then you have to market it and you have to get it out. That sounds like a lot of work, a lot of planning. So it sounds almost a little daunting when you from the outside looking in.
Yeah, I mean, I went in completely ignorant. I thought I knew roughly what I was doing. I think like I said, my focus was first of all just on the sheer technicality of how on earth do you release a book. How do I format this thing to make it do this, and why does Kindle Create not work? And all these sort of like heartfelt screams into the void, but no one can help you. No one can do it for you. You've got to figure it all out. So yeah, and obviously that's the bedrock, isn't it? If you've got anyone's entitled to self-publish, they can write whatever they like, whatever quality that pleases them. Like I said before, somebody's 5 stars, another person's 1 star, bounce straight off, isn't it? But yeah, so from my point of view, for your audience, writing the best possible book is obviously the bedrock. But that is only the start. You're absolutely right. Actually, the biggest single battle of any author, I think particularly independent, is actually finding readers. And I think I've written a good book. It's got into SPFBO finals, and there's a bit of element of luck in that. But I think also it's a good book. Good. You only get into the finals by being good. You might not. Doesn't mean that all the books that didn't get into the finals were bad books. It just means there was that element of luck where I lucked out. But that was a book that basically no one was reading before SPFBO. Being perfectly honest with you, it was tiny dribs and drabs that was very, very slowly going up. And then, like you say, like I said before, SPFBO kind of helped me level up a little bit, and then you find a slightly wider reader base. But I think for a lot of authors, marketing doesn't come naturally. And I think even using the term marketing is quite loaded for some people. Because I think a lot of people think that marketing is a bit like the door-to-door salesman selling you the vacuum cleaner that you don't actually need, with all the attachments that you sell as extra that you don't actually want or have anywhere to store in your cupboard. Never mind have any practical use in your house day to day. Whereas actually, I think marketing it's about finding readers that want to read your book. There is no point me shoving my book down your throat if you don't like it and me forcing you to buy it, because what you might do is give it a 1-star review on Amazon at the end of the day. What you actually want is to engage with people. And I think if you flip it around and think of it like that, it becomes a bit less daunting, because all you're really trying to do is, make yourself known. I think being supportive is quite useful as well from that point of view, because, you get paid back tenfold for every support you give to one particular author. I found it always comes back, and it just helps you go on, and it helps that conversation starts that word of mouth thing that you actually need. So yeah, it's not. I don't think I've ever bought a book based purely on a sassy ad. I bought a book based upon feeling like I know the author or know what the author stands for, what the type of writing they do, and it's that kind of becoming known and being part of the conversation. If you turn it into that, it's a lot less. It's a bit more natural, I suppose, really, and a bit less business orientated in industrial scale. They're not the type of thing that you can just throw at anybody and expect them to enjoy it, really.
Yeah, and it's also a time investment too. So it's tough to do that. But you're right. I think even I think getting over that feeling like a door-to-door salesman is tough to get over that hump of, because with no experience in marketing or kind of getting the word out.
Yeah.
It's intimidating.
Yeah, I think if you look back at everything I was doing in 2020, don't do that. And that's a great start in terms of marketing knowledge. I think it's not cynical. There's obviously a business element to it, but ultimately you're kind of selling yourself a little bit. I think that's what I had to kind of get more comfortable with. I thought the book would sell itself, and actually that is not the case. That is not the case. You have to, any author that's got a decent social media presence and got decent sales, that they've got that entirely down to hard work. No matter what you think about them as a writer and whether you want to read their stuff, every single one of them has earned their place, absolutely, and it's no different for anybody else coming in new. So you've got to start, you've got to embrace that side. If you're happy to release a book and for no one to read it, I suppose, that is your prerogative, isn't it? And people can, that's an option. But for me, I want people that enjoy this sort of stuff to find it and read it. So I've had to sort of embrace that really over the past 18 months and get, doing stuff like this. I wouldn't have dreamed of doing something like this 2 or 3 years ago. I really would have found it actually almost intimidating to the point of wanting to hide under the bed covers. I really would. So yes, you're a very welcoming host, and I don't feel at all intimidated. But that's because I've changed as a person in the intervening period, and sort of like started to embrace these things. And then half the time they're not nearly as bad as you think they're going to be.
Yeah,
a lot of people think, well, I can't do this, I can't do that. Well, actually, getting into this kind of world, you find you've got a lot more skills and resilience and aptitude for things, and I think sometimes we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, especially from my, because I'm just a reader. I just enjoy the book. So whenever I get to talk to authors, it's kind of like talking to like rock stars. So it's a treat for when you're invited. It's because we enjoy your work and want to learn more about you. So
Cool.
it's good that you feel more comfortable about that. And is there anything that your readers would be surprised to learn about you?
What would they be surprised to learn about me? I think, I don't know, maybe they'd be surprised to learn how little I do research. I think I'm very keen to not be perceived as somebody so this is Viking inspired fantasy. This is not a Norse inspired fantasy. So I've taken some of the culture and some of the trappings and, sort of world building view to sort of create a feel for the book and a theme for the book. But I'm not an expert in Norse mythology or anything like that. So I basically, my view is write the book and try not to let history get in the way. So for me, research was, I used there's a website called Viking Answer Lady, which is basically a lady that answers Viking questions. And I thought, this is the perfect website for my absolutely amateurish level of commitment to historical research. So, names and things like that are drawn from some of the resources on her website that helped give me a sort of feel for naming conventions and those sort of things. But yeah, I'm pretty much focused entirely on the story. I don't really spend an awful lot of time trying to I spend more time looking up whether it's lying or lay in terms of some of those author traps than I ever do in terms of sort of technical research, really. So yeah, I don't know if that's an interesting fact, but that's one thing that marks me out, maybe.
Yeah, for aspiring authors out there who want to write a Viking inspired, to go visit that website.
Yeah, that's all you need. Honestly, you don't put those books away. you don't need them at all.
So I do have a couple more questions for you. I know that you watched I think you listened to the Halo Scott conversation I had.
Yes, that's it.
So jelly beans, if you eat them all at once, or if you pick them out flavor by flavor.
It has to be flavor by flavor, because anything else is just anarchy, isn't it? Really, you're not actually getting, you're not experiencing. All you're getting is a massive sugar rush and a flavor confusion. Why would why would you not, corral them into their relevant color constituent parts? Anything else is just madness.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm not alone.
You're right. In fact, it's not alone. You're correct.
Okay. Confirmation, confirmed. Okay. Do you have a favorite family recipe?
Favorite family recipe? God. I'm guessing from the pause that's coming out here that probably the answer to this is no. I suppose we actually our house is rammed full of cookbooks of all shapes and sizes. So we try. I think one of the things about sort of, again, probably the COVID pandemic and being stuck in the house was, actually cooking and food became more important to us, and actually, trying to eat healthy, those sort of things. We get a lot, we get a lot of, fresh fruit, vegetables and things delivered to our house, and we always try and then kind of create something new. So I think in many ways, probably we're more trying something out for the first time is perhaps more fun than the tried and tested so far. So yeah, I'm not sure we've got anything that I would say that is the go-to recipe we have every week. We pretty much eat anything going, really.
No, that's interesting. So it's interesting the way that the pandemic affected everyone differently.
Yeah.
So because some people went the opposite way and just ate a bunch of junk food, and
well, that I'm not saying we ate exclusively. Takeaways have entered the Hardie household, so that was also a key survival strategy. But it's I don't know. From my point of view, it just anything that kind of helps draw the family together. Food is one of those things. We try and eat together as a family. Those kind of things. It might be in front of the TV. Nothing wrong with doing that either. It's food's an important part, especially with teenagers who just like eat phenomenal amounts of food anyway. You know, this is that family meal at the end of the day is the one chance to chuck a vegetable at them and hope it sticks, basically.
Yeah, I have a 16-year-old son, and I start to miss those days when I can just eat and eat and eat and not get any weight.
Yeah. That's it's just cruel. You watch them do this and think, why? They don't. The thing that frustrates me, they don't even appreciate it, do they?
No.
They have no. This is a gift from God Himself, and they have no idea that these days will come to an end. And all of a sudden, you'll be thinking to yourself, those elasticated trousers, I'm actually up for them, because that actually is what I need right now.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it. I look at food now, and I get a little fatter. So it's tough.
It's not easy. It's middle age, but unfortunately, it creeps up on all of us. So we just need to embrace it, don't we?
Oh yeah, definitely. And if you were in the Brotherhood of the Eagle series, would you survive?
No.
Oh.
No, it's too. No, I mean, I'd no. On every level, I'd be political. I mean, I'm although it's quite sort of, there's lots of political intrigue, I wouldn't notice what was going on around me. I'd get stabbed and offed if I was in the way straight away. But I think, to be honest with you, I'm not exactly, obviously the Brotherhood of the Eagles kind of built around this slightly macho, insane warrior culture that, everyone that's in that warrior culture thinks it's awesome. But actually what it's meant is that they're kind of fairly unprepared for the challenge that the novel actually and the series actually throws at them, because they sort of pursued, force of arms over, the magical kind of skills that other enemies are basically embraced. But also it just means that, only certain people of a certain physique are going to kind of rise to the top in that kind of culture. That is not me. So, I would be, I'd be in the field somewhere, sort of like plucking turnips or something like that. So whether I survive or not, Tim Hardie's not going to feature as a major part of that novel because of that culture. Really, I think I've created a culture I couldn't thrive in myself.
Yeah, that's fun though, right? You want to create worlds that you know.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's right. It's kind of that's why we write fantasy, because we kind of, it gives you tremendous freedom to do whatever you actually want to do. And you can kind of really go there as well. You can sort of build on an idea and sort of double down on it without fear or favor, really. But yeah, I'm basically turnip field surf kind of person. I suspect that would have been my lot in life, with a weak chest.
Yeah, I think I'd be there with you, pulling turnips. Yeah. So just a couple more. So what was your first job?
First job. I suppose. What, very first time I earned money, or first proper job, or do you want I was supposed to talk about both? I mean, I did odd bits and pieces. I think my very first job where I got cash in hand, although it was working for a family member, was gardening. So my aunt and uncle had a big house with a particularly big garden that they wanted me to weed for them. So I remember there was a couple of years where I sort of like got a bit of cash in hand just for helping keep on top of that, waiting jobs, those sort of things. I think my first proper job, so I've got a legal background. That's kind of where I started out. I've worked for what was it, a law cost draftsman company, which sounds incredibly exciting, but I'll make it sound more boring. Basically, this was a company that would take the files of law firms. This was working in Manchester back in the day, and you would basically take those files, work out how many letters had been written, how many phone calls had been made, meetings that happened, and you'd work out how much they should charge their clients. And my job wasn't to do that bit. My job was to tidy up the file before it got given to somebody who knew what they were doing. And then basically, this is all after I got a degree, by the way, in law. So it wasn't a great time to come out and sort of. I came out in the middle of quite a big recession in the UK in the 1990s when I finished my university education, and so yeah, I had basically a job of paper shuffling, and going around Manchester law firms basically to the back door, not the front door, the back door, where I would return files to law firms and get them circulated. Which it was a dull job, but it was the first job where I sort of got a paycheck out of it at the end of the day and thought, that's all right, I can actually live on this. This is okay. So hang on a second, just been messaged here. So yeah, that was the first proper job where I suppose I was paying tax. That's another way of looking at it. So and then yeah, kind of went on from there. But yeah, trainee law cost draftsman in Manchester. I was basically a man with a sack full of case files walking around Manchester, which was a bit of a strange image when you stop and think about it now.
Yeah, I bet it was a learning experience, though. I mean, I bet it was. Now that, of course, you've moved up, and now you know what those people are dealing with now too, so you understand more of the system.
Oh yeah, you're right actually, because as you literally you need to sort it out in data order, remove duplicates, that sort of thing. You had to skim the contents of what you were looking at just to understand, just to remove duplication apart from anything else. So you're right actually. There was, I think, with all jobs, you're always learning. You're always learning something, whether in this service, back office like that one was, or working with clients and advising them, which is what my job ultimately became later on. And there's nothing wrong with doing, starting at the bottom, working your way up. There's nothing wrong with that at all. In many ways, you learn a lot more by doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So something I try and ask all of my guests, just because I like to improve my questions and things like that, my process. If roles were reversed and you were in my position, was there a question that you would have asked that I did not ask?
Yeah, I knew this question was coming, but I obviously didn't know what you would ask. And now you've asked 2 questions. I can't think of anything you've not covered really. I was quite keen to kind of get out the kind of the roller coaster side of this for people that are looking at looking at authors and that kind of wanted to go there. And I think just to understand what it entails, but also that there's support out there. So I think for me it's been quite a useful conversation to sort of bring that out. No, I don't think there's anything you've not covered that I really wanted you to.
Okay.
I know you asked me before, didn't you? Did you have any topics? And I came up with a big fat 0. So I guess it does. It's the lack of research coming through again. I just don't really know what I'm doing or what I'm trying to achieve when it comes to this. So it's all random. It's all random and chaos.
Yeah. That makes 2 of us. I have no idea what I'm doing, but
That's
a lot
fine.
of
You're doing a great job of not knowing what you're doing. So that's awesome.
it's a fake it till you make it kind of situation. So we'll see what happens. But I know you're really busy, so I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I know you have books to write and you have family and work and everything else. So thank you for taking some time out of your day. And if anyone wants to connect with you, where is the best place to find you?
Okay, well, I've got a website, which is Tim Hardie author.co.uk. So that's sort of like central hub where I keep all the core information. So you've got all my social media links on there. I'm primarily on Twitter and, well, I say primarily, I'm only on Twitter and Facebook. At the moment, I'm not thinking of going too much further in terms of social media, really. So Twitter handle is Tim Hardie author. And it's the same for Facebook as well. I've actually got 2 accounts. So I've kind of got currently I've got an author account, but then I've also got, I suppose, an official author account. At some point, I might lock one down and just work with the other. But there's basically, if you search Tim Hardie author, you can hit either of those, and that'll again connect me on one of those on Facebook. That would also be fine. So yeah, those are the places where I'll lurk.
Cool. And I'll be sure and add all those links in the description on YouTube or on the podcast so everyone can go and
Cool.
find you. So thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on. It's been good fun. Cheers, Steve.
Thank you. Cheers.
Okay. Nice to see you.